So I think this opportunity that we're faced with in the journey of aloha is to understand that those lessons will help structure our journey so that we are successful.
Our entire One World Ohana connected heart to heart through pure aloha.
Aloha mai. Aloha aku. Aloha mai. Aloha aku. Aloha mai.
Hearing more about what everyone has to offer and learning from each other.
Aloha aku, aloha mai, the two faces of aloha. To give and to receive. It goes out and it comes back.
If you are interested in learning more about aloha, learning more about how you can connect with other people, I think this would be a good opportunity because different people of different ages come with thoughts that promote what you are doing. So I think you should join us because it'll be an experience that you'll never forget.
Aloha is about leaving people full. It's about leaving a place better than when we found it.
Knowing how to be in community, how to feed people, how to come together.
We're going through the greatest transformation since Copernicus discovered that the sun does not revolve around the earth. We know from physics that we are all connected energetically. That's who we are. We're connected just like all our atoms and molecules and all the energy are connected.
And so this afternoon, we're going to enjoy the stories of voyaging, or the tales of different voyages, to continue reflecting on our own. It gives me great pleasure. Well, the order is going to be the person I'm going to introduce, and then we'll introduce the next person. But joining us this afternoon is a great pleasure and privilege to introduce a friend and also a teacher, a mentor, someone whom I admire for the work that she does in our communities. Please put your hand together for Auntie Puanani Burgess. Wonderful storyteller, and she's going to follow up with some stories. But I'm going to ask Bob to introduce our first panelist to the rest of us. Bob?
In most cultures, there's a central hearth in which the communal fire burns. And there's always someone who tends that hearth and is frequently the carrier of the lore. And again, in most ancient traditions, the elders sit by the fire and pass the stories on to the youth who bring the sticks and the wood that feed the fire. In the Joseph Campbell Foundation, we have someone who tends our communal fire. We're an organization who has no place. We have no center. We consider ourselves an organization whose center is nowhere and whose circumference is everywhere. So keeping that community together and in conversation around a common hearth falls to my colleague up here. Now, his is a name that I will not speak. If you know in the Odyssey, remember that when Odysseus is in the cave of the Cyclops and he lashes his men underneath the sheep, and when the Cyclops says, "Who goes there?" he says, "No man." So it's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague, No Man, who will later today tell you the story of how he got his name.
Thank you very much, Bob. There are a few reasons for that introduction, one of which is I do watch television and I hear there are bounty hunters here. So, another is that I'm still not officially registered yet for this event. If you're late, they give you a speaking part. But also, I've been fascinated by the names, Hawaiian names, because they have meaning. I was talking about this with Puanani just an hour ago. And on the mainland, my parents, they named me, they had no idea what they were naming me. They just went with something that sounded good to them. And my name actually is Stephen Lawrence Geringer. Stephen, I guess, was named after the first deacon in the New Testament, although there was a time when I thought, well, he was the first person to be stoned in the New Testament. So that worked for me. And Lawrence, I was named after Lawrence Welk for my middle name. I was hoping for Laurence Olivier. But as we talked about our names, and I was pointing out my name has no meaning, I did mention having looked up the meanings of my names. And Stephen comes from the Greek Stephanos, which means crowned or kingly. And Lawrence comes from the laurel that they crowned winners of poetic events, Olympic Games in ancient Greece. So there seems a double theme there, double crowned, if you will. And Geringer is from the German for spear carrier. So apparently there's something warrior-like there. I don't know if I was throwing them, but just carrying the spears. Beyond that, I'm not sure of the significance, but I appreciate knowing the meaning of my name, and I try to live up to it. I do like the idea of Stephen as the deacon in the New Testament because he lived by service, helping others, especially helping the widows and the orphans. So that in particular works for me. I found out only a short time ago, within the last couple weeks. Well, in fact, I knew I was coming here a couple weeks ago, but I wasn't quite sure what I'd be doing. So I've learned only recently I'm telling a story. And trying to decide what story to tell. I'm in Hawaii, so the first thing I did was pull out my Martha Beckwith and my Thrum and start looking up Hawaiian tales. And then thought, well, that's the height of Howley hubris. I'm going to come over here and tell you the stories that you're living. So, since we're talking about the hero's journey, I thought something that is in common, goes way back, I'd start with the first story of the hero's journey, the first one we know of that goes back 4,000 years. Plus, you don't bump into that many ancient Mesopotamians these days. So, if I mispronounce the names, who's to know? Now, this story begins with a call to adventure, but it's a call that begins with death. Gilgamesh is the king of Uruk, and his best friend, Enkidu, joins him in killing Humbaba, this great monster, even though Enkidu doesn't want to do this, and he tells him it's not a good idea. He still supports his friend, his brother. And then they kill the bull of heaven, and there aren't good reasons for doing this. Gilgamesh is doing this because he's king. He's a mighty man. He's a leader. He's a hero. And brings us back to the subject of hubris again. The gods will not stand for this. So Enlil, the king of the gods, decides, one of you has to die, and takes Enkidu. And this rips Gilgamesh apart. He loses it. He weeps. He tears his clothes. He tears his hair out. He runs out into the wild and he lives for days on end, feeding off grass like a wild animal, not caring about anything. He grows his hair out. His fingernails grow long. He's lost his mind, we might say today, lost his mind in grief. And as he starts coming back to his right senses, he realizes, my friend has died. I too am going to die. And he fears death. The fear of death, that is his call to adventure. Sometimes it's not the conch shell, it's not an invitation, it's something powerful that moves us. And I tell this story because I think it speaks to a lot of us. A lot of us reach that point where death enters our lives, death of a family member. We're aware of our own mortality. In my case, I was close to death, and it changes your attitude completely. But in Gilgamesh's case, he decided he would defeat death. Immortality is what he sought. Well, if you're going to look for immortality, you have to go to someone who's immortal. And there was only one human then who was immortal, and his name was Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim had survived with his wife the great flood that wiped out all of humanity. Familiar story. We hear it in later versions a few thousand years later, but it wiped out all humanity, and the gods were so impressed with his perseverance, how he built a boat, how he survived, and how he repopulated Earth, restored the human race, that they granted him immortality. And he lives on an island past the ends of the earth. So Gilgamesh has to go there, and he doesn't know how to go there. But he heads out. He's looking for the ends of the world. He comes to a mountain pass. He heads north. Of course, when you're looking for the end of the earth, any direction will do. But he goes north, and he comes to that first threshold, a mountain pass that's guarded by a pride of lions. And he's afraid of death. He's afraid the lions will kill them, so he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to pass. So before he goes to sleep at night, he's off to the side of the trail, and he prays, he offers offerings and invocations to the moon goddess Sin. And during the night, he receives a dream that lets him know what the next steps are beyond the mountain pass. And it lets him know that he will survive. And that's that guidance we're talking about. Dreams are so important. Listening to your dreams, listening to other people's dreams. As we share dreams here, very powerful. Does that come from the gods? Does it come from inside us? Does it matter? It's something magic. So that gives him the courage to face the lions, and he defeats them, he kills them, he wears their skin, he creates clothing out of it, and goes through the mountain pass. And he's following the dream, the direction that he's supposed to go. So he travels a great distance, and he comes to Mount Mashu, which are these twin mountain peaks that are the end of the earth. And there's a tunnel there that no human has entered, no human has passed through. But there are two scorpion men who are guarding the entrance. And they ask him questions, a series of riddles. And he answers, and he responds from the heart. And they hear him, and they realize, this is a semi-divine being. You are worthy. If you can pass through the tunnel, go ahead. So he enters the tunnel, and it's dark, completely dark, utter blackness, cannot see anything. He has to grope and find his way through this. And he travels through this tunnel for 12 hours, which is almost too long, because this is the road of the sun. The sun rises in the daytime as Gilgamesh is passing through the tunnel. And it comes to Mount Mashu and enters the tunnel, the road of the sun. And at night, as we sleep, the sun goes down the road. And Gilgamesh emerges from the tunnel just before he's incinerated by the rays of the sun. And he comes out into this garden paradise where jewels bedeck all the trees, and there's pure, pristine water and plenty of food. And he wanders this land for a while and comes to a tavern. And there's an alewife, Sidari, who is the tavern keeper here. So he enters the tavern, and he tells her his story, what he's looking for, what he's seeking, Utnapishtim and immortality. And she tells him this is not a wise decision. This is not a path that you should be on. You should go back. But he's going to persevere. So she tells him how to find Urshanabi. Urshanabi is the ferryman who will ferry him across this vast sea, the sea of death, to the island on which Utnapishtim lives with his wife. So he finds, and you notice, This is his helper, Siddhari, someone he meets on the road, gives him the instructions he needs and what to say to the ferryman to cross the great water. But when he comes to the ferryman's house, there are these two great big rock giants, and he fights them. He's scared again. Death. These are monsters. He defeats them. He kills them. He scatters the rocks everywhere. And then he tells Urshabani his story and what he's looking for. And the ferryman says, well, just one problem. See, those two rock giants, I hook them up to the ferry, and they're the only creatures that can cross the Sea of Death. Because if you touch it, you're gone, and we're not going to get across. Well, Gilgamesh still wants to travel. He wants to go on the journey. He is going to conquer immortality. So the ferryman tells him what you need to do then is chop down 300 trees so we can fashion punting poles from the trees to push the ferry along. And the water will eat the poles up, but with 300 of them, we can get across. So Gilgamesh does this. This is his task that he has to do. We have tasks that we pass, ordeals that we face, helpers who help us. So he cuts down the trees, which takes a while, but it's a myth, so we can fast forward a little bit. And the boat enters the water, and they work their way over to the island. And Gilgamesh alights, and he goes up to this little hut that's much larger on the inside than on the outside. And this is where Utnapishtim and his wife live. So he tells Utnapishtim his story, what happened to his friend Enkidu, and what he is looking for, how he seeks to be immortal as Utnapishtim is immortal. And Utnapishtim tells him, no, you don't want to do this. Struggling against the common fate of all humanity robs your life of joy. You will not live in the moment. You'll constantly be struggling against the inevitable. And Gilgamesh says, easy for you to say, dude, you live forever. You're immortal. I want to live forever. So Utnapishtim makes a deal with him. If Gilgamesh can stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights, he will tell him the secret of immortality. And Gilgamesh said, no problem. I was king of Uruk. I can do this. I killed the rock giants, the lions. So he struggles. And before he does this, by the way, Utnapishtim opens the pantry, kind of the bread box, and points out, you notice we have no bread. Oh, okay, yeah, you have no bread. And he struggles to stay awake. 1 day goes by, 2 days go by. Finally, at the end of 6 days and 7 nights, he says to Utnapishtim, all right, I did it. He's very bleary-eyed, but now grant me the secret of immortality. And Utnapishtim opens the pantry, and it's full of bread. And he points out that every time you dozed off, I had my wife bake a loaf of bread. And I think we've all been there where you're trying to stay awake and you think you are. In fact, studies recently have shown that people who are sure they have insomnia still doze off in the course of the night. And this was what happened with Gilgamesh. And Utnapishtim points out to him, you want to conquer death. You can't even conquer sleep. You can't stay awake. No, you can't do this. But Utnapishtim and his wife have enjoyed spending time with Gilgamesh, and it's rekindled their interest in mankind. And so they decide to return to Uruk, to humanity. So they're going to depart, and Utnapishtim's wife says, the kid's been pretty cool to us. He's very sweet. Why don't you help him out? So Utnapishtim tells him the secret. He says, all right, if you go to the sea on the other side of the island and you go deep, 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 all the way to the bottom, which is not easy to do, you may find a boxthorn plant. It looks like a boxthorn plant. That is the plant of immortality. You take that, You eat it, it will restore your youth. And then Utnapishtim and his wife leave the island. Gilgamesh goes to the other side. He ties great big huge rocks to his feet, and he steps out into the sea, and he sinks to the bottom, and he's struggling, he's looking around, and there is the boxthorn plant. So he plucks it. He has the key to immortality. He cuts loose the stones, rises to the surface, goes up on shore. In some legends, he bathes, which makes sense. I had to do that today after our ritual. Good thing to do. In other legends, he falls asleep because he's been more or less awake for a long time. But either way, he's distracted. And a serpent comes along, sees the plant, eats it, leaves, and Gilgamesh wakes up and sees an old snake skin there, and the snake is off wearing his new skin because he now is immortal, and Gilgamesh weeps because he knows this was his chance at immortality to conquer death, and he lost it. So he returns to Uruk, which is a long journey. And he comes to Uruk, to the walls of Uruk, and he sees his family and his friends, and his attitude changes from loss and sorrow to joy at being with his family, with his kin, with his community. And every hero and every hero's journey, what completes the journey is that you bring a boon back for your community. You don't just go and seize the gold for yourself and let the derivatives market fail and you're paying yourself bonuses. You reach out and you share what you have gained from your journey. But what did he gain? He did not return with the secret of immortality, but he did come back with two important things. One is the knowledge that we can't stave off the inevitable, and if we try to do that, we do lose the joy of living in the moment. But the real gift he had to share with his community was the story, which the first fragments of that story we have found are 4,000 years old, etched in cuneiform tablets. And who knows how old it was by that time, because as we know from here in Hawaii, that long before anything was ever written down, stories are handed down generation to generation, lifetime to lifetime, over aeons. 4,000 years and then some. Certainly sounds like immortality to me. I'd like to share one other thing with you regarding the journey. And this relates to another voyage, another hero's journey. This is a poem called Ithaca. And if you may recall, if you're familiar with the myths or with your high school English classes, Odysseus, the walls of Troy. He was at Troy for 10 years, and he wanted to return home to his wife and family in Ithaca, Penelope and his son, but it took him 10 years to do so. He ran into the Cyclops. He had all sorts of adventures that were dangerous and hazardous, but he still kept going for Ithaca. And this poem is entitled Ithaca. It's by Constantine P. Cavafy. When you set out on your journey to Ithaca, pray that the road is long, full of adventure, full of knowledge. The Lestrygonians and the Cyclops, the angry Poseidon, do not fear them. You will never find such as these on your path. If your thoughts remain lofty, if a fine emotion touches your spirit and your body, the Lestrygonians and Cyclops, the fierce Poseidon you will never encounter if you do not carry them within your soul, if your soul does not set them up before you. Pray that the road is long, that the summer mornings are many, when with such pleasure, with such joy, you will enter ports seen for the first time, Stop at Phoenician markets and purchase fine merchandise, mother of pearl and coral, amber and ebony, and sensual perfumes of all kinds. As many sensual perfumes as you can. Visit many Egyptian cities to learn and learn from scholars. Always keep Ithaca in your mind. It is your destiny to arrive there. But do not hurry the voyage at all. It is better to let the journey last for many years and to anchor at the island when you are old, rich with all you have gained along the way, not expecting that Ithaca will offer you riches. Ithaca has given you the marvelous journey. Without her, you would never have set out upon the road. She has nothing more to give you. And if you find her poor, Ithaca has not deceived you. Wise as you've become with so much experience, you must already have understood what these Ithacas mean. It is interesting that, that Gilgamesh was written on cuneiform tablets 4,000 years ago. Then we moved to papyrus. Then we moved to parchment. And then printing press, block print, the printing press today of newspapers and books, then computers. And here we are back with tablets again.
That's great. That is a journey in itself. How about another hand for Steve? Thank you.